All right, so hello everybody. My name is Sean Asfeld. I am a solutions architect with our AWS GovCloud and government regions team. And so up earlier you had Ted and Travis talking to you, and they cover compliance and security. I also do that as well, but I handle that from more of a solutions architect standpoint, right? Working with the engineers, like how do you actually implement some of these things at a deeper level within AWS and the systems that you utilize. So first, we'll start with a little bit of a product evolution, right? So 2011, we decided to launch GovCloud West. That was our first region within GovCloud, and a lot of that stemmed around from ITAR and export control, right? So that was primarily around NASA. NASA had a use case for rocket data that they needed to be protected, and they needed a separation of that to meet those ITAR controls. And so then going a little further down the road, in 2017, we ended up getting IL5 accreditation, and before that, we had done an uplift to FedRAMP High. And so kind of our general practice for how compliance works within AWS GovCloud is we'll take something through FedRAMP High. Once it gets that FedRAMP High accreditation, then we'll follow that with an impact level 4 and 5, doing a difference of those kind of controls to get that additional uplift. We launched a second region in 2018, and so that really allows our customers, right, to operate within 2 different regions for resiliency, reliability, depending on if you have like a high value asset that needs either multi region architectures from an active-active or an active-passive or a backup type of infrastructure. All right, so today I'm going to primarily focus on a compliance standpoint between like our commercial US East and West and our GovCloud US East and West, right? So we have GovCloud is not inherently different than those regions, right? It's just built differently to meet different compliance requirements. And so GovCloud is where you would have those ITAR, export control, controlled unclassified information, PII, PHI, those kinds of things. Now, GovCloud, being a separate partition of AWS, is still internet connected, right? And it also has the ability to get into governmental trusted internet connections, cloud access points, or utilizing our direct connect back to your on-prem resources. So like I said earlier, there are 2 regions, one in the East and one in the West. Now, West was our first region. And so generally when our services go to deploy within those regions, they're going to deploy to either West and East at the same time or West first. So generally, you know, as a service is starting out, we're looking at what is that adoption and what are those business cases for that? And then as a service starts to take off, they will, you know, they have to hire those US persons in order to maintain that. And so as the service takes off, then they kind of grow that in order to expand into our East region as well. Now, our GovCloud regions are, you know, they have 3 availability zones per region. So you can build highly available workloads within a region. And then if you need that disaster recovery, continued operations, backup to meaningful distance away, then we have multiple regions available to meet those resiliency and reliability parameters that you have. A lot of customers, while we have direct connect, which is, you know, private fiber that gets you into your regions, whether that's commercial or GovCloud, it takes time to get that in place if you're not already operating out of a point of presence or a co-location. And so a lot of our customers will start with VPN. VPN will be their first connectivity into region to have that end-to-end encryption either from their data center or from their laptops or the people that are operating. So VPN is kind of a start, and then direct connect depending on kind of what kind of connectivity and speed that you need in order to get there. A large question that we get, right, is around FIPS. And so what is FIPS encryption, right? How do we meet that? And so, you know, whether using VPN, you're obviously going to configure that VPN, whether using our AWS VPN or your own network firewall, you're going to use the encryption ciphers that you need in order to meet that compliance. And so that's going to be both on your on-prem data center or your laptop, whatever your connecting device is into the cloud. Now, when we're thinking about direct connect, right, there's MACsec and there's all these different types of encryption, but a lot of those are hop-to-hop encryption. And your general requirement is going to be end-to-end encryption. And so That could be an IPsec overlay, or it could be enforcing TLS, right? If you have HTTPS traffic going over that direct connect, that's enforcing TLS if you're using the right encryption algorithms. You don't necessarily need an IPsec overlay on top of that, or a VPN tunnel, or multiple VPN tunnels to get the bandwidth you need. All right, so what are some of the kind of key values around GovCloud? Well, it unlocks security and compliance because we take our services through FedRAMP High or DoD Impact Level 4 and 5. We offer the tools that you need in order to meet security, compliance, FIPS, those kinds of things, right? So AWS is kind of known as a builder, right? We enable the builders to build the tools on top of our platform. And so we heard earlier today that not only is AWS a CSP, but if you're offering a SaaS or an IaaS or a PaaS, you all are also a CSP, right? And so we do our best to offer the tools that you need in order to meet those compliance requirements. And so GovCloud is specifically designed for that, for those higher levels of accreditation. All right. So Dr. Werner Vogel, our CTO for Amazon.com, likes to say that everything fails all the time. So when we start to think about that reliance, that resiliency, the reliability pillars, those kinds of things, we give you 2 regions, we give you multiple availability zones per region, so you can build highly available workloads. But it doesn't mean that just because you can, that you have to, or that you shouldn't, right? So looking at a use case, you have specific types of workloads that you want to operate in a region. And on a workload by workload basis, you might define whether this web app needs to be in 2 availability zones to meet our RPO and RTO targets, right? Our time to restore, or the amount of data that we can lose. Or maybe it needs to be in 3 availability zones, or maybe it needs to be in multiple regions, and it needs to be able to fail over quickly, right? So you're going to look at each one of your workloads and kind of rate, what are those resiliency targets that we're trying to meet? And then you're going to implement that in your architecture and design as you go to build out that workload or that platform. All right, so there are a few requirements to getting into GovCloud. So we as AWS, we're going to vet that root account holder. The root account holder is the one that is operating the commercial account and is requesting GovCloud access. And then beyond that, we're going to vet the business unit, or to make sure that you are incorporated in the US. So if you're a global company and you have a US subsidiary, right, you can request GovCloud access under that US subsidiary with that US person. So that could be a green card holder or a US citizen. Those are kind of the general requirements. And then last, we're going to check the person and the entity to make sure you're not on the debarred list for handling export control data. And I'm pretty sure that if you were on that list, you would know it. So shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. All right, so when you go to open a GovCloud account, you first start with a commercial account. So while GovCloud is a fully separated partition of AWS, it manages everything by itself, but what it does not have is a billing function. So all usage in your GovCloud account will flow back into that commercial account, and then we'll roll up on whatever billing infrastructure you have set up. So for every GovCloud account that you want to open or want to operate, you'll also need a corresponding commercial account. They are paired together for one-to-one. And again, that really ties back to that billing function. I'm going to show here in just a little bit talking about organizations and how that kind of maps between commercial and GovCloud. And so as you see the orange dotted line, or at least I think it's orange from here, down the middle, that creates that partition separation. So on the left side, you have your AWS commercial accounts and your commercial organization that is for like your master payer and those kinds of things for rollup. And everything on the right is your GovCloud accounts. And so if you see GovProd1 on the left, you also see a GovProd1 on the right. And those are 2 different accounts, and each sets of the partition. Now, on the right-hand side, there is a GovCloud organization account that has been stood up, and that is stood up in order to manage those GovCloud accounts. So when we think about compliance and security, we think about like managing those accounts. And so because of that partition separation, that commercial organization cannot manage those GovCloud accounts, and those GovCloud organization cannot manage those commercial accounts. Now, because GovCloud does not have any billing constructs, you could potentially have multiple GovCloud organizations, whereas on the commercial side, account root one is the master payer, and so you would have to create additional master payer accounts in order to create additional commercial organizations. Now, depending on the customer and the risk analysis that they've taken, some customers will stand up a second payer account in the commercial and run all of their FedRAMP, DoD, federal workloads under that payer. And then some other customers have put enough thought into how they are going to manage that account, and they will utilize the same payer. Or maybe they don't have the same risk assessment that others have. Maybe they're already only a US based customer, and they don't have foreign users that could potentially access that commercial account or potentially terminate it, right? So there is no right or wrong answer. You can operate under one payer account, or you could have potentially multiple payer accounts, just depending on what your risk analysis is of that. So this slide is the same thing, just shortened down to show that one-to-one mapping, right? So any usage in Gov account, GovOrg1, right? Any usage from that account from a billing perspective will flow back to the commercial account. The usage will show up there, and then it will roll up under whatever payer structure you have. I'm going to pause there for a second. Are there any questions about commercial accounts, GovCloud accounts, organizations?
Yeah. So if you start on the commercial side and then you wanted to go for FedRAMP authorization, do you have to migrate everything over to GovCloud, or is there a way to get all the services over?
It depends. So if you're going to operate a FedRAMP moderate, you can meet FedRAMP moderate within US East and West, and you do not have to transition to GovCloud. If you are going to go for GovCloud for FedRAMP High or IL4, IL5, you will have to rebuild that. Because of that partition separation that is between commercial and GovCloud, there are ways to move data between them, but they're not native AWS because of that logical isolation that we have. So example would be an S3 bucket. If I want to move data from a commercial S3 bucket to a GovCloud S3 bucket, I need two sets of credentials. One to make the call to pull the data down from the S3 and commercial, and another to put the data back into GovCloud. Now that could happen from GovCloud, that could happen from commercial, that could happen from your laptop. But you, in essence, you need a man in the middle to talk to the two different identity and access management stacks. There is no cross-partition role assumption or any of those kinds of things. Anybody else? No? Say that.
What if I'm a federal customer and I have a VPC in GovCloud? I have also a commercial account?
You will also have a commercial account. You may not have any workloads in that commercial account, and that's our general guidance, is that you're not going to build anything in that commercial account that's attached to your GovCloud account, because you could potentially have multiple, right? If you're looking at this organization, or we think about Landing Zone Accelerator, which we'll also cover, you could have a whole host of accounts. And so if you look in this one, there's a GovCloud organizational unit in the commercial side. The reason that we depict it in that manner is that maybe all of those commercial accounts that have GovCloud accounts attached to them, we're going to put those in that OU so that if somebody logs into that commercial account and says, there's no workloads in this account, we should terminate it. Well, no, it's in the GovCloud OU. That means it has a GovCloud account, and now we need to go find the corresponding GovCloud account and validate, are there workloads in there or not? Or we could look at billing, right? But maybe the person that is looking at EC2 doesn't have access to billing, right? So we kind of have to think about logically, how do we kind of lay this out and map it so that it meets compliance and also de-risks, the potential. Because, the only way to close a GovCloud account is to remove all of the workloads and then terminate the commercial account, because they're tied together one-to-one forever. So a good example of that is if you're an infrastructure or a PaaS and you build something for the government and they decide, hey, we want those GovCloud accounts. Well, you have to give them the commercial accounts to give them the GovCloud accounts. Well, at least to move the payer structure, right? But if you have a bunch of workloads in those commercial accounts and a bunch of workloads, there's no way to decouple that. So either you rebuild the GovCloud workloads or you rebuild the commercial workloads. So the general guidance is, unless you're building something, complementary to the GovCloud workloads, you would operate that in separate commercial accounts. All right, so compliance. So currently there's about 147 services available. It could change. This could be 148. Who knows? I haven't looked at my email much today. But then there's services that are also available in GovCloud East. And so there is a little bit of disparity about what's available in West and what's available in East. And so as you go to design your workload, or if you're taking an offering that you currently operate in commercial and you're looking to see what services are available in GovCloud, you might map that against either West or East, deciding on which region has all the services you need in order to operate. And if they're not there, then you should reach out to your AWS account team and talk to them about having an influence in getting those services into GovCloud. We have about 122 FedRAMP High authorizations. And last time we checked, we had 155 third-party FedRAMP High authorizations on top of GovCloud. So it's not only like what does AWS offer, but then what do our partners, our third-party organizations, our customers offer on top of our platform? Like I said earlier, we're here for the builders, right? We really expect that people will come and build on top of our platform to offer their platform. So we have lots of different compliance programs. IRS 1075 is one. We have CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Service. And so that might be state and local agencies operating with federal agencies, right? That might drive requirements to push them into GovCloud. We obviously have our DoD Impact Level 4 and 5 requirements, our FedRAMP High, and CMMC, as Travis had alluded to earlier. So CMMC, what's pushing those requirements from a FedRAMP Moderate to a FedRAMP High would be the data classification. So whether that CUI has enough risk that it goes above like what a FedRAMP Moderate equivalency would be. So there's a whole bunch of different controlled unclassified information classes. And one that, I find to be kind of funny is like agriculture data, right? And it's like, okay, we've got all this data on the farmers and like what's being produced. And you're like, but why would they consider that CUI, or why would that be controlled data? Well, as we know that we have foreign interests that are constantly trying to get all of our information. And so, it could be potentially harmful. And so maybe something in that data has pushed it to a higher classification level that would require, maybe it needs to have additional controls in place in order to keep it safe. But then things like critical infrastructure, I mean, that makes sense, right? We want our critical infrastructure to be safe, be secure from outside pressures. And we know that, at least from the AWS perspective, we know that everybody is constantly under attack. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? And so the idea behind compliance, security, and all of these controls that we implement is really to, try to drive that those high value assets can be, they can be protected in a way that not only meets compliance, but also meets those security requirements to control that data. Talked about this a little bit earlier, but there is a security control inheritance and there's a responsibility. So AWS is responsible for everything of the cloud, and then you as the customer for everything in the cloud. So when we think about in the cloud, that would be, the things that you build on top of what we're offering. And it's a sliding scale, to whether it's EC2 or a managed service, about where those responsibilities lie. But in general, the things that you're going to be looking at as a customer is going to be encryption at rest, encryption in transit, and then identity and access management policies. Who has access to the data? What are the data flows within a system? All of those kinds of things that you need to do in order to maintain that. It could be as high as 80% on the managed service side or higher, right? Where you only have to make sure that you're using a KMS key that you control who has access to it, right? From a specific service. But then you move down to like EC2 where you're doing patching, you're building the applications on top of it, right? And it could go down to as low as like 30 or 40%. So it just kind of depends on the service. Obviously, things that AWS is doing to maintain the physical infrastructure, the power, the cooling, all of those things, those are all inherited from us, right? Those are things that you don't do. but then like it could be a service where you have to do patching, maintenance, Active Directory, all of those things to meet it, antivirus, to a service where you're consuming it almost like a SaaS, right? Where you're just hitting an API to make calls and potentially analyze data. So, all right, so we talked about this earlier, ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulation. And so this is really just what are things that are on the US munitions list? Like what are things that are protected? And so more importantly than what is ITAR is what does that mean for compliance in the cloud, right? What applies in the cloud? So ITAR compliance in the cloud focuses on ensuring that information considered ITAR technical data is not inadvertently released to foreign persons or foreign nations without proper authorization. So what AWS GovCloud offers you is that we staff US citizens on US soil. So if for some reason you didn't encrypt your data and somebody from a data center who pulled a hard drive that failed inadvertently got access to that data for whatever reason, that wouldn't necessarily create an incident, right? Because they're all staffed with US citizens on US soil. However, let's say you decided to make database calls across the internet to a SaaS provider that wasn't using encryption, right? And within that data payload was some kind of munitions list or ITAR or technical data, right? And somebody who wasn't a US person got access, that would be considered, that would be going outside your boundary, but kind of the best use case would be, having that non-US person actually get the data would be classified as as inadvertent or improper access. All right, so we talked about this earlier, but so we have low impact, moderate impact, and high impact. Now within GovCloud, you can meet low, moderate, and high because we take our services through those accreditations. And then within our US East and West commercial regions, you can meet FedRAMP low and FedRAMP moderate. When we think about what these data classifications mean, generally, you don't get to decide like, oh, I need my system to be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP high. It's going to be the data classification that the government, state and local agency will decide, hey, our data meets this impact level, and so this is where we need you to be on the controls front. So these are just a few of our security, identity, and compliance solutions or tools that we offer. Highlight on the left, right, our Identity and Access Management, or IAM Identity Center, which you can do single sign-on or SAML assertions with choose your third-party SSO provider. We have our detection tools, things like Security Hub, Guard Duty, Inspector. We have our own AWS network firewall, or we have third-party firewalls. If you're operating currently on-prem and you like your firewall provider, right? There are lots of virtualized versions of your favorite firewall available within AWS. We have our KMS, our key management system that allows you to protect data at rest. One thing about KMS, right, when you think about a system running live, so that data when it's shut down is protected at rest because it's not moving. But when you use that key to decrypt the data live in the system, it is now live and not necessarily protected. It's within your host, it's within your VPC, but you have to kind of think about like, what is that delineation between what's live and what's at rest? All right, so I'm gonna skip ahead here a little bit, talked about landing zone. So landing zone is based upon CMMC or DoD Impact Level 4, and what it's designed to do is be a layout for what are kind of AWS best practices, AWS tools for operating a base infrastructure. And so if you see on the right, you've got your security OU, you've got your audit tooling account, but below that, what's important is you have, VPC plus N, right? So all of your workloads, your dev, your test, your production, application A, B, C, mission A, B, C, those are all sub-accounts, and you can do those in multiple ways, but we suggest putting account as a boundary around that. And what landing zone does, it gives you that infrastructure as code to get started quickly on how to kind of lay this out and get some of the AWS tools in place. Now, if what you see up there is there's a network firewall, right? A next-gen firewall, you still have to choose that firewall. Could be an AWS network firewall, could be Palo Alto, it could be Cisco, it could be whoever you want. But it's not overtly opinionated so that you still get choice in that. You still have to set up a log scheme. You still have to do logging and alerting. Those are not necessarily services outside of AWS native services that we offer, right? For how your applications or your workloads are operating. And then we have down there, we have Bastion. We have Active Directory WSUS, right? What are you going to use for your patching? What are you going to use for your identity management within your systems? So those are still kind of options that you get. Now we do have partners that will take our infrastructure as code and they will build upon that to deliver a system more quickly. And some will go as low as, hey, you choose what you want all these things to be and we'll build you a solution based on that, all the way up the scale to, hey, we have a package and we will come and we will deploy this. It's opinionated. This is what works. This is what we've done for others. And this is what we can deploy today as infrastructure as code. And so kind of depending on what kind of flexibility you do or don't need, but we have partners building on top of AWS, building on top of our landing zone accelerator that can get you the rest of the way there. All right, so like I said, engage a partner. They're here to help. That's kind of AWS's way of thinking, is that we give you the builder tools and either you build it or you engage somebody to help you build that as well. We've got 2 minutes for questions. Anybody?
In landing zone, do you have anything that would be considered a SIM in code to meet the IR controls, or it's strictly the AU controls you're doing?
Mostly the AU. So it doesn't have, you're not going to ingest outside like application logs and things like that to do your login alerting. You can do some of that within CloudWatch and CloudTrail for native AWS services, but you still need a SIM on top of landing zone. Yeah.
I want to just make sure I understood, or I heard you correctly on an earlier slide. I think you said that as long as you build in AWS GovCloud East or West, that your application would, or your environment would be good for controlled, unclassified information. Did I hear you correctly on that statement?
You still have to build things on top of that, but our services are up through FedRAMP High and Impact Level 4 and 5. So you're inheriting those controls.
Yep.
You still have to also make sure that, you know, identity and access management, who has access to the data. But yes, CUI, you can go up through CUI. If you need to go above unclassified, then we have additional environments that you can build. We have secret and top secret.
So generally for CMMC level 2, if I'm using the AWS services that are available today in GovCloud East or West, I'm generally good, just
Yes.
as a rule of thumb.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And for CMMC, we've had partners that say FedRAMP moderate is good enough. That's our equivalency, even if, depending on how severe the CUI is. So it potentially could, but we also have customers that say, that's too much risk. We're just going to go to GovCloud, where we know we have higher levels of accreditation and we know CUI is good. So. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being here. Thanks for listening.